Hi there. Earlier I said that I wasn't going to deal with the front end of the fuselage until I've got the motor, but I still can put F1 in place as long as I don't cover under the underside of it. Otherwise that will make it somewhat tricky to mount the motor plate. The first thing I want to do though is to cut the cowl ring, and rather than just cut it to the extremity of the external moulding, I want to cut it just inside that, because the one concession to scale I am going to make is I'm going to utilize a 3D print of the very sort of characteristic part of the FW190, which is the fan that sits behind the prop. Very distinctive. So I want to replicate that, and one of the forum members very kindly produced a file for the 3D print, which I'll be printing a bit later. So that will require me to cut to round about there rather than to the outer edge. So how do I determine, how can I do that? I need to find the center spot. Yes, if I've got calipers, then I can measure it, but let's assuming I haven't. How can we do that? We can use a bit of paper, so that's what I'm going to do now. So using a bit of paper, I'm going to press that down into the center of the cowl ring there and just work my way round the paper, pressing it into the corner or the edge of where the cowl ring juts out. I don't particularly want to cut it yet, because if I use my nails it may make a bit of a rough edge like there, so I'm just going to push it gently into the edge. Letting it fold. What I can do is just start to draw now round where that edge is. I can feel it under my fingers. Only has to be roughly, so there's my circle that's drawn out. If I use a pair of scissors, got here somewhere, I can now cut that out. To the rough circle. There we go. Let's just make doubly sure that's a good fit, which it is, and then to determine where the centre is, just literally fold it over half and into quarters. There, and when I open that out, I've got the centre mark there. So all I'm going to do is just going to form a hole through that, enough for my pencil to get in there, put it back into the cowl ring and mark where that hole is there. Just to doubly check, and I'd say you probably won't have, or you may not have, digital calipers. Let's just see how accurate that was. Just measuring that across, that's about 98 millimeters diameter. So if I go to my, oh, bang on, 49, which is half of it. So that's exactly right. And the reason I've marked that is because I'm going to put a little hole in that with my pin there, and I can now use that centre marking. The reason I put a hole in there just in case the pencil mark rubs off, but I can now use that centre marking and I can cut another disc of paper to the right size, overlay that, and then just mark around it. Or if you've got a pair of protractors with a pencil in, obviously put the pin in there and then just draw around. So that's how to find the centre of an object which is difficult to measure because of these, in this case, the recesses here. So back again, I'm going to cut the hole. I'm going to use a hole cutting saw because I have got one that's big enough to do that. But if you had to mark it yourself, then you could drill a couple of holes, smaller holes in, and then just use a small hacksaw blade or need a Dremel to cut through it. But I'm just going to use this bad boy, centering the drill bit on the hole that I just pushed through the plastic. There we go. That's the hole neatly cut. Just trim that up a bit with the blade and a bit of final trimming with a bit of sandpaper. Just to get rid of the bits of plastic on the inside as well. Might as well rub that down there because the 3D printed fan has got to be glued, and you need to make a good key on this plastic. And that's actually it's a very good point. We'll cover it again when we come to doing the finishings, the painting. But these mouldings really do require a good key for the glue to adhere, for the paint to adhere to. So a good going over with sandpaper like that. So you get rid of any shiny parts. And then ultimately what I will be doing before I paint this, I'll actually be cleaning this with some isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, which will get rid of any oil that my hands have put on there. Okay, so that cowl ring now is ready for me to cut the lip off. Once I've determined the amount I've got to cut off here, I actually made the hole bigger in the end because I 3D printed the nice fan blades that Simon had produced on the forum, was made available on the forum, and that sits in there. So my cutout came a little bit too far in. I wanted a bit more gap between the inner ring of the fan blade and the outer of the cowl. So I did that and made that slightly bigger. And I've cut the flange off the cowl ring, and the idea is now that this ply ring sits in there, glued in there, and then obviously that can be then mounted to the F1 on the fuselage. I'm going to use super glue for this. I've thoroughly abraded with sandpaper the inside of the front ring, the cowl ring. So now, not my favourite glue, I must admit, super glue, but we're going to use this, or I'm going to use this on this ring here. Mainly as an experiment. I usually use, on something like this, Gorilla Glue Clear, which is one of my favourite glues for all-purpose gluing, and I found that it sticks most things together, but I am aware that people like to use super glue, so I'm going to use it to join these together. Hopefully I can always strengthen the joint from the inside with a bit of difficulty because there's not much room for that. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put that on top of some parchment, baking parchment, because obviously I don't want it to stick to my desk, my worktop, sorry, and then just place the ring over the top of that, and I then know that they're dead flat. One marries up against the other. I can put my fingers inside to that ring there, the ply ring, push the outer ring down, and I know that they're married up. And you know what, I don't care if it sticks to the parchment paper because that's disposable. And having a look at it here, yeah, it's not too bad. Obviously final levelling off can be done with my sanding block if I'm not too happy with it, but to my mind, sorry I was off camera then, to my mind that looks pretty good. So I'm not going to play around with that too much. I'm going to let that thoroughly dry, probably overnight, and I know super glue goes off very quickly, but yeah, that's okay. I'm happy with that. We'll leave that now until tomorrow, when I'll be bringing the whole of the front of the fuselage together, measuring up for the position of the engine mounting plate and positioning that. Hopefully my motor will have arrived tomorrow, the Overlander motor, fingers crossed anyway, because otherwise that's going to hold me up a little bit, because as I said before, I don't really want to fit F1 to the front of the fuselage, although I can just grab hold of the fuselage now, as long as I don't infill and put the supporting block of balsa there. That's just loosely put in, by the way, F1. I can get at the sides here for mounting my block. So I'll see what the post brings tomorrow. If the motor comes, it comes. If not, I'll crack on with getting this area finished, this stuck in, and preparations for the motor mount as well. Something else that needs to be addressed on the fuselage is the back of it, the rear end, the stern, the post if you like, or the fin post. That is where the fuselage sides come together there. If we were to just glue them, there's no real strength, and in fact when we put the rudder onto the back end, we have to put a hinge into this part of the fuselage, and without no real substance there, that hinge isn't going to stand a lot of stress. So what the best thing to do is to infill that gap with a bit of balsa. Again, taking a bit of scrap from the from the box, measure up the length that we require, which goes from the bottom of the fuse up to the underside of the elevator. Lengthwise, the best thing to do here, I can suggest, is if you just squeeze the two sides together until they join there, and then slot your bit of balsa, well, not slot it, but put it on top and see where the front edge of that balsa touches the fuselage sides, and in effect that's the length that we require. We're going to have to sand that in that shape to obviously make a bit of a wedge to fit in there. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll cut it across here. And again, just double check on the depth of that. It's absolutely fine. And then squeeze that in, double check on the length. That's where my pencil mark was. So now the difficulty, of course, now is sanding that to get that edge in place. So I'm just going to, I've got a sanding board here that I use, which has got an edge which I can push things against. But because I need to form a fillet, I need to sand that, and I'm going to do it in a couple of bites, sanding across the fillet there, and obviously against the opposite way here, and then again the opposite side, and the last bit. A little bit more maybe on that. So yes, hopefully you can see the profile of that, and if we just offer it up to the fuselage, push that in a bit. It's a pretty good fit in there. I've got a bit of a, there's a bit of a lump on that, so I'm just going to sand that down. And if you make a pig's ear of it, what the hell, doesn't matter, plenty of scrap left in the box, so you can have another go at it. slide it in again. There, that looks good to me. And it just gives it a bit of extra strength. You could come further back with the fillet, entirely up to you. To say I've got what I think is enough to give me a nice strong back to the fuselage there. So I'm going to stick that in place and clamp it. And I'll, once again, save time, I'll do that off camera.